Welcome to this short presentation about the hierarchy of language. These are the general elements that we include in a hierarchy of language. This is not the only hierarchy of language, but one that serves our purposes very well. Note that letter here refers to alphabetical letters, not to modes of correspondence, of course. Now, phrases and clauses are both groups of words, but in this context, a clause is a group of words that contains a finite verb. A phrase doesn't. The word phrase is used in many ways, but in the hierarchy of language, this is how it is used. And text refers to both spoken and written. So the hierarchy starts with the smallest units of language at the bottom, which brings us to this, obviously. Some people leave out letter, actually, because it's not a semantic level. But as you will see, it does serve a purpose. Now, with the arrows pointing upwards, this is a bottom-up view of language. Learning language from language assumes just as much a top-down view of language as it does a bottom-up view of language. Now, you know this feeling, this wonderful feeling when you learn a new word. Well, a few days ago, someone on the BBC not only used the term commander's intent, but explained it, expecting that viewers would not know it, and I certainly didn't know the term. Anyway, it went straight in. I remembered it immediately because I just read a book by Rutger Bregman called Humankind. And this concept is referred to quite often in that book, but not by that name. He doesn't use that name. And a few days ago, a friend of mine told me how delighted he was when he finally understood the difference between an adverb and an adverbial. It's this sort of new input. It's like an adolescent's growth spurt. At first, a little bit unsettling as you realign your understanding of the world, and then you are expanded and you're prepared to deal with new chance encounters. It's quite marvelous, really. Anyway, I always think, in my job, I always find it strange that I have to defend the promotion of meta-language, especially in vocabulary teaching. Because, students of sport, well, they expect to learn about physiology and nutrition, and students of photography, they learn about light and colour and form. Students develop their skills and knowledge of their fields through the terminology, whether in a first or second language. We saw this earlier. When students are studying chemistry or geography or in literature classes, there are many, many terms which they learn, and it is the terms which express the concepts which are the field. So in language teaching, teachers in textbooks directly teach dozens of grammar concepts, many of which are abstract and almost indigestible. And they all have well-known labels. Well, they're well-known now, such as those we can see here on the left. But for some reason, there is very little expectation that students could benefit from or handle lexical terms such as those on the right. Well, lexical terms like those on the right are extremely valuable. So, let's have a look now at some of these terms and see how they align with the hierarchy of language. So here are these lexical terms we were just looking at, and I wonder how these relate to the hierarchy of language. And it's probably more obvious how these grammar ones relate, because we've been dealing with grammar terms all our lives. So, what about conjunctions? Where do they belong in the scheme of things? Or lexical cohesion? Is that to do with text, or is it words, lexis? Aspect? Cultural references. And negation, where do we put negation? That's an important aspect of language. Modality, the uses of tenses, colligation, relative pronouns, conjuncts, US-UK differences, comparative superlatives of adjectives, the SZ alternation that we see in spelling, neologisms, checking spelling, connotation, nouns from adjectives, how do we do that? Functional language, where does that belong? Word choices between similar words, is that part of the hierarchy? Grammatical cohesion, the verb plus preposition, so that's, for example, verb from noun. Very common structure in English. Prefixes and suffixes, where do they belong? So now we have them in the groups that match the levels. What you need to do now is see which level goes with which set. 10 seconds. So here we have it. At the text level, we include such things as cohesion. At the sentence level, we combine elements to make sentences using conjunctions, relative pronouns and things. For clauses, remember they have a finite verb and they are often controlled by their tenses and aspects, modality and negation. Clauses, remember, do not have a verb. These are word-based structures and they often express functions. And then at the word level, collocation, connotation, colligation, word choices between similar words. Yes, interesting. How do we choose one word over another? There must be some mechanism for that. And neologisms, new words in the language. When we are creating new words, what are the processes? Well, some of them involve prefixes and suffixes, others involve compounding. And then at the bottom we have the letter level, and as we've seen elsewhere, differences between American and British spelling. So, this hierarchy of language is like a giant coat hanger on which we neatly position many aspects of language. It can help teachers structure their teaching and help students structure their learning. It can also help us define the limits of grammar. This can seem like a huge mass of stuff, many more elements of language that we can see now, and many more aspects of each element. In fact, it might seem like everything under the sun could be counted as grammar. Grammar is an abstract set of rules that covers syntax and morphology. Morphology concerns the form and structure of words. Syntax concerns the arrangements of words and morphemes in a sentence. This is how we arrive at the lovely term morphosyntax. We can take this one step further. We can say that morphology looks at words within and syntax looks at words without. Then we might even go so far as to say that vocabulary equals grammar. There are plenty of linguists who agree that grammar is a set of generalizations over the lexicon. So what can we do with this? Does it have any practical application? I believe it does. When teachers introduce a new language feature, they are empowering their students to do something that they couldn't do before. We teach and learn about the use of can with verbs of perception, which suffixes we use to make nouns from adjectives, the use of relative pronouns to make complex sentences, and understanding the importance of intonation in question tags. Teachers introduce hundreds of things, and most of them have labels or terms, like these. When we attach them to a hierarchy of language, we can see how they are empowering the students. You can say to your students, well, what have we just been learning? Good. So where does that go on our hierarchy of language? Yes. Very good, very good. We've got quite a few ways of thinking about forming clauses now, haven't we? That's good, because we're now going to find some more examples of this in today's text, and then you're going to write your own. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So these are the sorts of things we can do with our students. Also, many students simply appreciate order. They like to know where in the scheme of things new things belong. Like, where are we on the map? Some students also want to look into things in more detail themselves, perhaps find some online exercises. They need to know what to search for. Or perhaps they create pages in their learning journals for specific things. They need to know. Teachers often say that they wish their students would become more independent or more autonomous. Well, teachers can make their wish come true. Provide students with knowledge structures that the students can fill in with more and more examples of language features. Empower them to make observations. They can put two and two together if. Working from the text, we're dealing with our skills zone. Students performing the act of reading and writing and speaking and listening. This means that they're working with texts and the 4 skills. But so that students get better at the 4 skills, we teach them more of the systems. The lowest 3 items in the hierarchy are what we teach about vocabulary. The middle ground covers grammar, and we introduce functional language into the mix when we teach students to make sentences and combine them into text. Functional language is in many ways dependent on register and genre. CEFR terms, these pragmatic aspects of language are often articulated by functional language. So how do we take turns? How do we develop our themes? How do we have spoken fluency? Well, we use functional language to express many of these things. The hierarchy of language is a simple, flexible, and effective way to conceptualize language. It is one of the tools or instruments we use to make learning visible.